Let's talk about gun control. Just moments and for hours after the recent Las Vegas mass shooting, the worst in American history, people immediately began to politicize it to fit their narrative and their agenda. I'll admit, I myself was assuming it was going to be a Muslim terrorist attack, simply because that would have conveniently fit my worldview and is an automatic response due to the regular occurrence of Islamic terrorist attacks throughout the Western world, which are occurring with greater frequency every year. While I was live online reporting on this tragic event, I added to the disinformation with my own speculations and my political ideology influencing my thoughts at the time. I have learned from this and will report on these kind of stories differently going forward. I'll be more careful not to add to the epidemic of fake news being pumped out to the social media platforms. But I am certainly not the only one guilty of this habit of speculating on live events as they are unfolding. Many people took to Twitter and other platforms immediately after the Las Vegas mass shooting to try to use it to boost interaction and momentum for their political and social agendas. Desperate political figures like Hillary Clinton jumped on Twitter to say, "The crowd fled at the sound of gunshots. Imagine the deaths if the shooter had a silencer," which the NRA wants to make easier to get. We can and must put our politics aside, stand up to the NRA, and work together to try and stop this from happening again. And celebrity singers and actors and actresses chimed in with their irrelevant political commentary too. Ariana Grande made news when she posted on Twitter, "My heart is breaking for Las Vegas. We need more love, unity, peace, gun control, and for people to look at this for what it is, terrorism." Jimmy Kimmel used his late-night talk show as a platform to go on an emotional rant where he uses absolutely no facts to back up his political opinions and even lies and misrepresents. An example of that would be when he claimed, "New gun laws and bills will be written and watered down and they will fail because the NRA will smother them and we will get distracted." If you actually take a look at the NRA's history, they are not even in the top 10 for spending in the political system. The reason the NRA is so influential is because they have millions of members, private citizens, contributing to the protection of our Second Amendment right to bear arms. The American people are not willing to elect officials who are going to repeal our Second Amendment rights. It's not the NRA preventing legislation from going through. These celebrity entertainers, audiences, and their fans just eat this stuff up. Even Ariana Grande's own fans seem to forget that the terrorist who attacked one of Grande's own concerts earlier this year used bombs, which are highly illegal. No anti-bomb or bomb control laws stop them from blowing up kids at her show in Manchester. What makes her so convinced that the outcome would be any different if there had been even more restrictions on guns than were already in place? Or what about the man who committed the shooting in Las Vegas? The FBI and media within hours concluded and reported that there was no link to terrorism, although today many in the media are reporting odd inconsistencies and new information, leading to much speculation about this shooter and his motives. Terrorism is usually used to describe a violent act that has a political or religious motivation behind it, and so far, there is no confirmation that this was an act of terrorism. So let's talk about gun laws as they stand right now. I don't think most people on the left who are calling for more gun control understand how many restrictions are already in place by law on guns and gun owners. California gun laws are some of the most restrictive in the country. A person is required to pay a $25 fee for a 5-year firearm safety certificate, submitting all of your personal data to the state, and passing a written test by a certified instructor. This must be done every 5 years and is required for the sale, delivery, loan, and transfer of any gun. Depending on your criminal history, you may be denied a permit altogether. In California, the sale of automatic weapons, which are classified by the state as assault weapons, are prohibited. These kind of weapons are already illegal to own without a California dangerous weapons permit, which is extremely difficult to get. California is also a may issue state when it comes to carrying a concealed weapon, basically meaning it's almost impossible to acquire a permit to carry. And although some studies have suggested that in the last few decades gun violence has gone down by half in California, these restrictions did not prevent 22 people in San Bernardino from being mowed down by a homegrown violent Muslim extremist. Let's take a look at New York State gun laws. Though a bit more relaxed than California, gun owners are still required to file for a permit even to purchase a pistol. A gun owner is also required to obtain a permit to carry a concealed weapon, not only in the state itself, but also in New York City if they plan to carry statewide without breaking the law. Two separate permits for the same state. New York also has a magazine capacity restriction, preventing people from owning magazine sizes greater than 10 rounds. In 2013, in the wake of the Sandy Hook school shooting, Governor Cuomo passed the New York SAFE Act, making these laws even more restrictive and even redefining what is considered an assault weapon. Although gun violence has gone down since the laws were passed in 2013, according to politifact.com. They say, correlation does not equal causation. Trends show violent crime with a firearm was already going down statewide before the SAFE Act. And even State Representative Chris Collins went so far as to say some of New York State's gun laws are infringing on people's rights and should be scrapped. And even in Las Vegas, Nevada, where gun control laws are much less restrictive, the man who committed the shooting from the hotel window was in fact a millionaire who had a level of wealth which would allow him even easier access to any type of weapons he wanted, whether they were legally obtained or not. And if he were unable to get the guns he wanted to inflict this kind of carnage, he could have resorted to running people over with a truck instead, the way the terrorists did in Nice, France, the attack back in 2016, where 86 people were killed when he drove into the crowds with a truck. It is much easier to get a license to drive a truck than to obtain a permit to own firearms. Does that mean we need stricter truck laws? Give me a break. America already has extremely restrictive gun laws in place where many could make the argument violates our Second Amendment rights. Every year, every decade, the left tries to slowly encroach on our Second Amendment right to bear arms by calling for additional restrictions, and they will use every single tragic incident involving a gun to push forward their agenda. Founding father Benjamin Franklin once said, "Those who would give up liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." Instead of asking for more gun control, we need to ask which rights will they attempt to take from us next? Should we just hand over all of our constitutional rights in the name of some wishful thinking about how the world should be or a dangerous false sense of security? Another question we could ask about gun control is, even if we outlaw guns nationwide in the United States, which is what the left really wants, gun confiscation, would it be any less easy to acquire them? Heroin is highly illegal in New York State, but I know from personal experience it can be very easy to find and purchase. Gunlaws.com states that in Rochester, New York, there was even the reported statistic that 22% of all young males in the city, as opposed to just those who are juvenile offenders, have carried an illegal gun at some point in time. The illegal gun market is already very prevalent, and no level of additional restrictions on guns has prevented the black youth from shooting each other at an epidemic rate. Most gun murder victims are men between 15 to 34 years of age, and 66% of those victims are black. What makes people think that if we pass more gun laws, it would prevent one single white mass murderer from acting out on his violent urges? Gun confiscation is not going to rid the streets entirely of dangerous weapons that could be used against innocent civilians. Another obvious question in regards to Kimmel, Grande, Clinton, and the others who seem to be so outraged by the mass murder in Vegas last weekend, why is it that the only time we see this kind of outrage is when a white guy with a gun commits a heinous crime against society? I don't recall these celebrities and liberal politicians taking to the airwaves and their Twitter to express their concern about the literally hundreds of shootings committed every year by black youth in America. There are shockingly huge numbers of African American citizens being killed by gun violence in the leftist-run Chicago. In 2016, the Chicago Tribune published an article with the headline reading, "With 500 homicides in Chicago, time for African Americans to get tough on crime." Of those 500 homicides, the writer reports, nearly all those killed were black men shot to death in alleyways and on street corners by other black men. Why are the celebrities not tweeting about these facts? How can the left claim to be concerned when it's a large number of people killed by a terrorist or a white guy, but remain silent on these everyday violent shootings? Just last week, outside of Nashville, Tennessee, a black Sudanese man opened fire in a church where one person was killed and 7 others were injured. Why was there no outcry then? We heard nothing from the politicians or the celebrities about gun control or gun laws in response to this violent attack. Only later on in the week, after the Las Vegas shooting, did people start to protest. During the week of September 27th this year, the Chicago Tribune reported again, "Weekend violence in Chicago leaves 32 shot and 4 dead." It's a fact that shootings and homicides by firearms remain much higher in Chicago than in recent years. So far this year, the city has seen 489 deaths, with 80 occurring in June alone. Chicago has one, if not the most restrictive gun laws in the country, but their citizens are being killed by the hundreds. Though many of these illegal guns come from out of state, Chicago fails to imprison these offenders for long enough and lets them back out onto the streets to reoffend, and at the same time, they want to point a finger at neighboring states for their lax gun laws when states with less restrictive gun control have much lower levels of gun-related violence and death. We never see the NFL players or their coaches or celebrity backers or the politicians taking a knee to protest the black-on-black gun violence in Chicago. Why is that? That's more of a rhetorical question.
We had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
Now to the issue of whether or not this was terrorism. Ariana Grande says it is terrorism and everyone should acknowledge that fact. But actually, terrorism is described as a violent act that has a political or religious motivation, like when the Muslim Islamic terrorists attacked people at her concert in a country that already made guns illegal entirely. The UK citizens have no right to bear arms, yet terrorists were able to inflict major damage and death on innocent lives at her event. As of today, the Las Vegas shooter has not been reported to have any political or religious motivation behind his actions, although the rumors and speculation are being discussed as additional photos, video, and information leaks out. Sadly, we are being told that it might just be another crazy white man who went far down into some depths of insanity or evil to commit such a senseless mass murder. The crazy white mass murderer is not the same as a Muslim extremist bomber, and that distinction needs to be made. We will learn more over the coming weeks as the investigation unfolds whether there is any evidence of a true motivation for the mass shooting. We have to recognize the differences between these kind of killings because obviously the same tactics used to attempt to reduce a crazy white man committing a mass murder shooting will not be the same tactics used to stop Islamic extremist bombers. If we label everyone that kills more than 1 or 2 people during an event as a terrorist, regardless of motivation, we will inevitably dilute the definition of terrorism to include situations where robberies and home invasions and other criminal acts involving the use of a weapon result in death. We must fight against the attempt to label these kind of criminal acts as terrorism. Terrorism involves an obvious and recognizable political and religious motivation at its core, while senseless violent mass shootings like the one recently in Las Vegas does not. So when Hillary Clinton and other politicians on the left start calling for more gun control, while the NRA is attempting to popularize the idea of silencers, and it appears there is some attempt to make changes to the laws, we must ask ourselves at what cost are they planning on making these changes? What are the long-term consequences of giving up even more of our constitutional right to bear arms than we already have? The first consequence is a further erosion of our rights under the US Constitution if any additional gun laws or restrictions are pushed through, or if states begin to pass even more restrictions at the state level to put up additional barriers to our right to own and bear arms. We must defend our rights against this push by those on the left. We are no longer allowed to own military-grade weapons. Ben Shapiro made the following point in a recent broadcast for the Daily Wire when he stated, "The founding fathers would have wanted us to have AR-15s because the fact is that back then, all the weapons people had were military-grade weapons. A musket was a military-grade weapon. AR-15s are not even military-grade, so we already have a huge difference between military-grade weapons and weapons that civilians are allowed to own. He went on to argue that the Second Amendment absolutely was written to include military-grade weapons for citizens, and to argue otherwise would be ridiculous. Shapiro is quoted as saying, "That would be like arguing the First Amendment should not include TV or radio because the Founding Fathers didn't understand the technology at the time." Hopefully, you can see how this argument that the Second Amendment should not protect our right to own military-grade weapons is ridiculous. The second consequence of restricting guns even more is that even if we banned all guns, that would rule out any possibility of defending ourselves and others during terrible acts of violence and mass murder. In an article from 2015 on cato.org entitled "The Cost and Consequence of Gun Control," the author states, "Policymakers should remember that several mass murders in the US were prevented because citizens used firearms against the culprit before police had arrived." I agree, and we must ask the question, if no one is allowed to own guns, how are we to protect ourselves against the criminals and terrorists who would still obtain guns illegally in order to commit mass murder and other horrific crimes and terrorist attacks? As I mentioned earlier, anti-bomb laws and bomb control has not stopped the terrorists from blowing up concerts or marathons, so why would we think that additional gun control laws will do anything to keep a terrorist or a criminal from buying a gun for the sole purpose of committing mass murder? And even if the killers were unable to get guns, we have been reminded by recent events in other countries, mass murder, using bombs, running people over with vehicles, stabbings, and other means of killing have and will be used. Killing does not require a gun. Allowing the government and the left to encroach on our rights will only embolden them to attempt to continue to encroach on any and all of our rights. Not only that, but taking guns completely off the street, which we all recognize would be impossible to do, considering the amount of illegal unregistered guns that are already out there, would not stop mass murder. In conclusion, when politicians such as Hillary Clinton and Andrew Cuomo, or celebrities like Ariana Grande and Jimmy Kimmel, tell us to put our politics aside and start discussing gun control, maybe the appropriate response would be to tell them to put their emotions aside and realize that we must defend the Constitution and not violate it based on frustration, fear, sadness, or any other feeling or emotion. Our system is not perfect, but the comparisons people make between our constitutional rights and UK or Australian gun laws is extremely unpatriotic. Well, look at them. They don't have guns, and they don't have mass shootings. Well, they also don't have our true freedom of speech rights as we know them, and many of our other civil liberties and freedoms set out in our Constitution, which we are fortunate to have. They also are not safe from an increasing level of terrorist attacks involving bombs, trucks, and knives to murder people, and no amount of gun control policy has stopped the carnage happening throughout Europe. The United States is the last true beacon of real freedom and hope for the world. If we allow the left or anyone else to politicize these tragic events in an effort to change our way of life or to further erode our constitutional rights, we will all wake up one day and wonder, what happened? How did we lose so much liberty? I'm not willing to sacrifice my liberty and the liberty of future generations for some false sense of security. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. Also share it across your social media platforms, especially on Twitter, and make sure to subscribe to my channel for more content. I'll leave a link in the description below for my live streaming channel. I like the live streaming platform a little bit more. I can engage and interact with you guys in real time. And I'll also leave the link in the description below for my Patreon as well. So I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next video.